Welcome all. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you and yours are all keeping well and keeping safe during these troubled times. I'm Rob Vember, Senior Advisor with the Global Business School Network. We're a network of over 100 leading business schools from around the world. We're in over 50 countries across 6 continents. Please visit us at gbsn.org to find out more details. This is the first webinar in the Business of Proofing Business School series presented by XOLAS, EFMD Global Network and the Global Business School Network. The session is being recorded. A link to the recording together with contact details for today's panel will be emailed directly to you in the coming days. Of course, we'd love for you to participate, encourage active participation, so please feel free to utilize the chat function. That's the button at the bottom of your screen. You can converse with all panelists, send through questions, and of course, we'll try and get around to as many of those as we can within the hour. Today's webinar, Moving Executive Education Online, How Much and for How Long, will be moderated by XOLAS founding partner Ulrich Hommel. Ulrich is an internationally recognized expert of accreditation, quality management, risk management, and strategic leadership in higher education, and not to mention a prolific writer on business school topics. He served in various leadership capacities at EFMD, including Director of Quality Services, Director of Business School Development, and Director of Research and Surveys. And Ulrich has completed more than 20 years of service as Professor of Finance at EBS University of Business and Law in Wiesbaden, which included appointments as Dean, Rector, and Managing Director. Ulrich, thanks so much for your time today. And over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob, and welcome you all to the first webinar of the Business Proofing of Business Schools series. When I started to discuss this idea with my colleagues at GBSN and EFMD Global, we concluded we have seen lots of webinars and free advice delivered to business schools, but what has been underemphasized overall is the business dimension of the impact of COVID, meaning, what is like the immediate impact and how will the world change from a business perspective post-COVID, whenever we actually will reach that state. We're obviously very much uncertain about that. The series is designed to be open, but we've currently planned 5 segments. Today, executive education is certainly one of the most pressing issues right now. Next week, we will talk about the business side of international recruitment. And then after the summer break, we will have 3 more sessions on how to actually make business schools more resilient, how to redesign risk management. And the 5th one will deal with funding issues and how you can actually gain access to capital if you need it, which for a certain group of schools will certainly be very relevant. It is my pleasure to share this webinar with global experts in executive education as panelists, and let me just briefly introduce them to you. For one, Dominique Turpin, currently the Dentsu Chaired Professor of Marketing and Dean of External Relations at IMD, and also former President of IMD. Now, Dominique has a long-standing experience, not just as the leader of IMD, but also as an executive trainer, as a coach of CEOs. And he also has a strong interest in Asia. So I'm sure he can also provide us some insights from a different continent, given that he actually spends normally so much time there. Welcome, Dominique. The second speaker is Jörg Rocholl, president of ESMT. We actually share a common interest, not only that he was actually a member of a hiring committee that was looking at me as a fresh post-habilitation graduate. He's also in my field, corporate finance, and I think that will actually add another dimension to our discussion today. But he also represents ESMT, one of the global leaders in executive education. And then lastly, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Martin Mörle. I think we also go back almost more than 20 years. Now, Martin currently is the Director of Corporate Services at EFMD Global Network. And in that role, he also is responsible for the CLIP accreditation. But he's a On the, besides doing that, he's also consulting companies on HR and talent management issues. And he has actually a long history of actually being also in an executive role there. So for instance, he was previously the global head of talent at UBS. And before that, the chief learning officer and global head of HR development at Deutsche Bank. So welcome you all. As Rob has already said, we would like you to be an active participant of this webinar, and for that purpose, do not use the Q&A, use the chat function. And I would actually encourage you that you also briefly mention the institution and a very punchy question that I can then forward to the panelists. I will try to keep this as an active discussion, so with a bit of ping pong. And that means I will actually not work down the list of questions that you post, but I try to select them so that it actually fits, that we will have a nice conversation. Now, we will start now with I will start with two questions, which I think will help us to ground our discussion. And then I will give the panelists an opportunity to deliver an introductory statement that actually summarizes their perspective, where we are in executive education and how the future will look like. And then we will move into the discussion. Now, the opening questions are, how is, from your perspective, COVID impacting the executive education market right now in a global context? And second, how is actually COVID impacting the way firms are structuring their talent management? And to what extent will that actually make corporates different clients for business schools in the future? Dominic, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think it has been, the COVID-19 has been affected executive education a great deal, and especially for us at IMD, because we used to have about 9,000 people coming from 100 countries to either our campus in Lausanne or in Singapore, or we would go and deliver programs in different parts of the world. So that's the first thing. I mean, I think everybody who has been in executive education has been affected by, the travel issue. The second thing is that I think that many companies and executives have realized that Zoom technology has done wonders, because we were able to move very quickly from face-to-face to online. Of course, the experience is not always perfect, but people have realized that you save time in terms of travel, that some of these webinars can be taken from many, many different schools. Before, you could not attend a course at Stanford, Harvard, or AIM or wherever. But I think that now people have realized that they can pick up different topics in different schools, and this will, I think, dramatically also affect the brand perception of different schools. On the second point of it, well, again, the COVID has given the opportunity for many companies and also to many individuals to refresh, their learning of management, to be able to attend a lot of very different courses. I think that today we have a huge repertoire of courses that people can choose from.
Jörg, you want to come in? Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah, with pleasure. With pleasure. So on the first question, I think Dominic brought it together very nicely, comprehensively. It obviously has a big impact on executive education, simply for the restrictions being there, for other reasons also that companies now need to concentrate really on their core business. At the same time, you see now also that, again, as Dominic said, the online part does increase. So blended, hybrid models, different types of models are being considered. And nonetheless, I would argue that if there's no in-person type of element in there, it's not anymore executive education. So it will crucially depend on this in-person element to some extent, no matter how big that element is. And then at the same time, we observe, and I think this comes to your second question, that maybe as in any other crisis, the opportunity cost of education goes down. So this means the incentive, all else equal, for participants, for students, for executives to actually use the time to invest in their own education is a good time. And now it's up to the business schools to react to that in ways in which they can accommodate exactly those demands.
Very good. Martin, the corporate perspective.
Yeah, so I think the experiment of working from home has worked better than expected around the world. With all its difficulties, people maintained the ability to be productive and engaged. And we see learning has played a role, very focused on the way of managing a virtual team, a distributed team. And we see high consumption of digital learning assets in the last 3 months. And it gave a huge push to get those skeptics more positive about digital learning. And I see we have experienced a huge acceleration. Now, those providers who have already a nice portfolio of digital learning assets could support quickly their clients. Others had to rush to virtualize as much as possible what they had. So income-wise, we see certainly an impact on short term. Long term, this working from home experience, we see in many organizational discussion about, okay, we should allow much more working from everywhere going forward. And the question is, how much would we expect people to come together in the office? Is it 1 day a week? Is it 2? And what would we do in the office, and what would people do on their own at home? And one of the things where you want people to come together is to build social cohesion, glue trust, and leadership development and executive education programs have always played a role in that, and they will even more so in a much more distributed workforce in the future. Very good point.
Let's now turn to the introductory statements, and I want to point out that Raymond has picked up on Jörg's comment that it will actually not, 100% online will not work. That's not executive education. So if you could all just kind of build that into your statement, that would be actually very good. Let me start now with Dominique. Dominique, when I actually prepared for the webinar, I remembered that the two of us were actually doing an ACFIS visit in Canada in 2015. And it was right around the time when the Swiss Central Bank discontinued the peg of the Swiss franc to the euro. And within a day, the Swiss franc became 20% more expensive, which obviously for IMD meant the costs went up by 20%, but the revenues didn't change. And that's, I think, a perfect illustration that executive education is a very volatile business. And so it's actually, it's a different cup of tea compared to degree programs. Now, what is your thinking on how we actually should be moving forward? What are the challenges? And let me, for this purpose, I can actually not share my file. So Nicole, can you come in and share the PowerPoint?
Yes, give me 1 second.
And Dominique, why don't you just start?
Well, it's clear that executive education has always had the challenge of demonstrating the impact. I think this is critical because companies spend a lot of money, and they're always asking this question, how do I see my return on investment? I think today you have different ways to demonstrate impact, especially if you are working with companies on certain projects. You have also a problem, which is, the time frame. Obviously, when somebody attends a course in any school, the question is always, is the return on investment coming next week, next month, or in a couple of weeks, or in a couple of months? And that's always very difficult to demonstrate. But I think today we have been able to, at least in some cases, being able to see how people are being promoted, what kind of project they are running, is this project having an impact, on the company, and so on and so on. So I think this has been the most challenging thing that I think business school have had to face, is to demonstrate the impact of what they teach. That's, I think, is number one.
Okay. I think Nicole is still trying to work out the technology, but I'm assuming you have your 4 points in front of you. So,
but some people also were wondering if online would work for executive, because we know that for student MBAs, undergraduate, graduate program, it has become now the common practice. Actually, we found at IMD that it works for executive. We just had a program that finished last week. It's called Orchestrating Winning Performance. And we used to have about 350 people coming on our campus in Lausanne for a face-to-face experience. And within a couple of months, we actually had to innovate and come up with something, similar. And to our, happy surprise, we were able to, to mobilize about 300 executives. So that's, for us, that was a huge success. And I think that executives are seeing the advantage also of attending, online courses, provided that you rethink the experience, and we'll come to that. Because, if you want to replicate a 3 hours lecture online, this is going to be a challenge. I'm not sure that people will have the patience to, to listen to a professor who is going to talk for so long. And that the technology today is only one camera, but we can talk about that later on. But I strongly believe that we need also to think about the learning experience in a new way. I would call it the Netflix way or the Hollywood way, where you would have a professor speak tell a story in different pieces, but also, we're having 2 or 3 different cameras so that you can capture, the speaker from different angles, because you have to replicate this experience. People today are so used, to the Netflix experience or to watch movies, short movies, that we need to rethink totally the learning experience.
Thank you very much. We're still working on the slides, but I think it's clear, you can then concentrate on what the panelists are saying. Maybe that's even better. Jörg.
Yeah, thank you. I try to, in my, let's say, 4 hypotheses, I'd like to be style consistent and use 4 times the letter I to start with. And I think actually one indeed overlaps with Dominique's point before. So first, and this goes back to also questions coming up in the chat, is, in my view, the importance of transformational experience. So in that sense, we will see, and we are seeing, a commoditization of knowledge. So this means many of the pure knowledge pieces can be found everywhere. They can be found in bits and pieces around the world. So therefore, really for us as business schools to make a difference, we can't rely simply on knowledge pieces, but it really has to be combined in a transformational experience, an experience that comes with a service that has a real lasting influence on the participants. It will involve a very dedicated view also on lifelong learning, on growing, and therefore, and we obviously can focus more on this in the discussion. Therefore, I would say, no matter how little, how small this is, for real top-notch executive education, we need a personal component in there. Dominique already mentioned my second I, which is impact. So maybe I will put more emphasis on also the acceleration. We have already seen before the crisis that probably universities and business schools face one of the most significant disruptions in the last decades, maybe even in the last centuries. We see significant investments in ed tech in various fields. I would expect that a lot of what we consider as state-of-the-art today will not be state-of-the-art anymore going forward. And many of these changes using technology, personalization, digitalization are significant drivers. Third, is what I call intelligent blending. I think it will be very important to figure out intelligent ways in which one can combine knowledge pieces that could be online with a transformational experience that will be in class. And I think Martin mentioned this before, I think it's obvious now that there are institutions that have already invested quite a lot in technology to enable them to provide these blended pieces. Here at ESMT, we had a major investment program, I would say 2 years ago. We have, and I can mention this as it's public knowledge, we had a blended, our first blended and at the same time first corporate MBA for executives at Deutsche Telekom, where we brought together blended elements, 80%, in-class 20%, and it went very well. A lot of positive feedback by participants for seeing this type of blending. And fourth is what I would call individualization. And this is where blending will help. So in that sense, blending will allow for more individualized learning journeys for executives. So that it's not just one program, be it open enrollment or customized, but rather that they have a way to put together different, in Germany you would say Bausteine, or I could say elements, combine them in an intelligent way to address the specific needs by individual participants, to give specific focus on what they need in particular, and in that sense have a combination of online but also face-to-face interventions to really provide the best possible individualization for these participants. So in sum, a lot going on, a lot of changes. I would also say maybe a little bit of quite a lot of uncertainty, which also means maybe experimenting is also one element at this point of time. Really try different things and just see how they will work out.
Thanks, Jörg. Martin.
So I agree to both points from Jörg and Dominic. Both represent organizations that have the one IMD been on top of the ranking since long, and ESMT has been a successful challenger moving up the rankings. So both certainly have done things right. I would like to add to the perspective of a consumer, of a client of a business school, and just make clear that despite the fact that digital learning has since 20 years been a topic, and it was a slow movement, was a bit of a push here and there. There was a lot of organizational inertia. Some organizations are further down than others on the corporate side, but the COVID has really been here a huge shock in the system, and there was a rush to virtualize on both sides, on the provider side as well as on the client side. And we have put content online, and it's only the first step to deliver an effective digital and at the end blended learning experience. So we are together in exploration mode. We have together to come up with better and better environments. Just putting content on Zoom alone, Zoom allows to use polls, chats, whiteboards, annotation tools, streaming, and then comes gamification, simulations. There's much more which we all have to get better at. And we did at EFMD a member survey in 2017 asking about the major challenges that members see in learning and leadership development down the road, and how to effectively cope with it. And one clearly mentioned issue was we have within our teams not necessarily all the skills for a effective future learning provision. And our partners, by the way, don't have neither. So it's an upskilling and upgrading challenge for the corporate world, and I guess also for the exec providers. The second topic I wanted to mention is that there is more and more the need to quickly upgrade and extend the capability. And instead of, if you are not large enough, have not the investment capability, then there is to do everything in-house and to build the internal capability. There is, from a provider side, certainly the opportunity to team up with startups, with edtech companies, to broaden your own skill set. And we see that with the Excellence in Practice Awards at EFMD, where we invite since 10 years partnerships of organizations in need of development and providers of development, that on the provider side, it's less one business school or executive development center, but more and more we see teams of 2, 3, 4 teaming up to deliver a convincing solution. Now, the third point I want to make is that we see more and more that learning functions move from a learning provider to a learning enabler, that they, instead of having a learning management system pushing content to learners. They more and more move towards a learning experience platform where they host a number of exits, even allow employees to upload contents, to have community-generated content, which needs curation. And the curation job is now very prominent in leadership development on the corporate side. And that offers an opportunity for a business tool that they not only offer comprehensive programs, but that they deconstruct and decompose their offer and use digital assets that they have and other assets and offer them as part of the curated experience platform. So they could sell components instead of entire programs. And the last point I want to make is the classical good old executive education offer was targeted at accelerating the growth of your talent pipeline. At the different levels, you try to propel and accelerate talents to take on a more comprehensive job. Now, this is more and more difficult to detach from the context. And the context is that organization in the pandemic more than ever need to reinvent themselves in major transformation programs and about reconfiguring their value proposition, in cutting cost, in doing this, in doing that. In these programs that business schools offers need to much more be contextualized. So you need to offer, as consultants do, who support often the transformation programs in companies, more on the diagnostic side. Surveys, Delphi studies about how do certain managers perceive the strategic situation, and are they convinced about the own strategic response? How do they see the forces at play? If you play that back at the top team in the executive board, they often are very positively surprised about the wealth of insight they get as part of the design process. So you need, as a provider, to invest more in organizational development capability in your design, maybe team up with coaching capability, maybe team up with diagnostic providers to be more broadly able to support a transformation program beyond the pure learning experience. So that's my 4 points.
Ulrich, if I may, I'd like to come back to what Jörg was saying about the personalization of the experience. I think this is very important. I think that both for what we call public program and customized program, I think what is going to make the difference between the different players in the industry is to be able to really customize, personalize, follow up, something that schools have not been always very good at doing. And one thing that we should not forget is that, before the COVID, already when it came to business school and executive education, we are already in competition with corporate universities, consulting firm, whether it's the McKinsey Academy or even smaller, consultancies. And I think this competition is going to intensify. So I think it's the opportunity to really rethink, how do we deliver a different, impactful and personalized experience, learning experience.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the topic. And I want to also pick up on questions that we received from the chat. Lots of participants in this webinar are kind of wondering how, virtual and personal fit together. So we're talking about, the emergence of the distributed business school, that the business school is no longer in one place. Everything overlaps. We have like little islands in other business schools that serve as learning centers. We're speaking about virtualization of the workspace, where people don't meet all the time. But then you argue that to actually do executive education, we need to have some kind of a personal experience. And let me just now link that up to what we discussed before the start of the webinar. The challenge obviously is you look at a face and you don't see the body anymore. You don't see the full body language. And you have to interlink with your client or the participants from your client institution. You have to kind of pick up the, whether you actually catch them emotionally, which is much harder to realize in a virtual setting. So if we assume that virtual will stay to a certain degree, how can we actually, what do you see as a future development in terms of ensuring that we actually can deliver pedagogically what we're asked to do, that peer learning is actually constructed also in a virtual setting? And that may be a pedagogical issue, but that may also be a technology issue. Maybe you see also some technological developments that could be used in this context already. Who wants to go first?
Happy to start. I think the technology is only at the beginning, because we have all discovered Zoom, and at IMD we have turned numbers of classroom meeting room into Zoom meeting, but we have also developed a numbers of what we would call studios, where you would have large screen, high definition, you can see the participants recognize their expression. Actually, the software today is designed to recognize, you know, the body language and the face of expression of the participant. The prof can also stand in a room. You can use 2 or 3 different cameras. So that's why I think we all rely very much on Zoom today. But it's in probably 6 months we will be having other technology that will compete with Zoom, because I think we have all realized, whether we are business school or corporate academies, or that you know, the technology is evolving also very fast. We have been doing in 3 months what we were planning to do in 3 years, but I think the next 3 to 6 months are going to be as exciting as the previous 3 months that we have went through.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to this. So one experience we are making at this point of time is that the attention span in front of Zoom is shorter than it is in person. So for example, what we do in some cases is to run a program online over 2 days, 2 half days, rather than do it in 1 full day in class, simply because participants tell us we can't have the same level of concentration for such a long period of time. Nonetheless, obviously, we would like to cover everything we do. And what is also interesting is that within technology, there are lots of options we can use. So breakout rooms, for example, seems to be a very good mechanism. So bringing students, participants into different groups, having the same experience also in smaller settings in which they can interact more closely. And maybe the last point is that also there's a lot of learning best practice. I mean, we have a lot of exchange among our professors to get to know what works well, what doesn't work well, and really to get advice from one person to the other to figure out how we can keep improving. And I think going back to Dominic's point, this improvement process not only comes with our own ability to transmit parts, but also in terms of technology, which other options may become available.
Thank you very much. Martin, and let me play devil's advocate. The headlines of what we've just heard very much also applies to degree programs. That the challenges that we had to meet. And executive education, has actually different challenges that we basically have to meet as business schools. So what do you see concretely, if you actually want to stay in business, be successful in the executive education sector, what kind of investments need to be carried out within a year or two if you actually are serious, if you want to be a serious player?
In the degree programs, you have, not necessarily at the very beginning, but over the duration of the program, much more homogeneous group. They go through a pretty clearly defined learning journey with clearly defined learning objectives. In executive education, you have a more heterogeneous group. And to personalize the experience, the development of learning journeys, being a program deconstructed as a learning journey with several modules, or that you combine your program with many other interventions over a duration of 12 months, allows much more to personalize. So you could combine digital learning assets from a huge pool of sources to make up for very specific learning needs of an individual. And the in-person interventions are more or less really focusing on something which is relevant for all, or where you all want to go through the experience. So I see this combination of blended solutions allowing clearly for more personalization. And then comes more and more, still in its early days, but when I look at the increase in the investment in EdTech, many AI applications on the market in the next couple of years that help you to clearly personalize very much your own learning needs. And I hope that business schools could apply some of this EdTech in their provision.
I'm wondering what you said so far, what that actually means about what it takes to be competitive in this sector. And let me return to the Netflix example that Dominique has used. Yeah, if I interpret that correctly, it's about, you know, rather than booking a program, you actually book access to a library with some synchronous and asynchronous elements. You know, it could be actually a huge portfolio of stuff that is in there. If that is actually the standard that we are moving towards, that would imply to me that the minimum efficient scale to be in that business is actually rising. That may be temporary, but may be sufficient to actually push certain players out. And in combination, will we also see more market entry that non-academic institutions will actually move into that space, potentially in alliance with an academic institution? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think the technology is going to move faster than most people think. And again, I mean, Zoom is only one option you have. I think that in the next month or years, early years, we're going to see new technology emerging. Number two, I think that, yes, you can have a, you know, so the technology is not going to be a differentiator. The content will be a differentiator. And I think that we are going to see, actually, it's already available, a lot of courses that, you know, people can choose from. But to me, what is going to make a big difference is the delivery. You know, a professor with great face-to-face is not necessarily great in front of the camera. So I think that all the schools have been kind of retraining, you know, their faculty using actors, and I think we all need to reach out to the alumni who are in the movie industry or you know, in the broadcasting industry, so that we can advise our faculty on how to build a story, because we are selling an experience. We're all selling, you know, practical experiences, because the big difference between, I think, you know, executive education and undergraduate or graduate education is that executives tend to be very, you know, people who have experience, a lot of experience, and you know, they would not stand a professor who would speak for 15 minutes and he's not practical. They can switch up very, very quickly. So that's why I'm coming back to this issue of we need to rethink, you know, the delivery experience, because our faculty are great. There is no question about that. But how do you know, pass your message? And by the way, when you are online for, as you said, maybe 25 minutes, you cannot have a pack of slides or 40 PowerPoint slides. You cannot have 5 different messages. You need to have, so that's why you need to rethink the content, you need to rethink the delivery and the impact that you want to create the participants. So technology will help us with that, but the most difficult thing I believe to execute is, you know, rethinking, you know, the experience and the faculty interaction with the participant.
Very good point. Jörg, let me challenge you a bit. Yeah, I think this perception, how do you teach online effectively? I think we all face that, be it in degree programs or in non-degree. But concretely at ESMT, what have you done to get your faculty ready to meet the standard that Dominique has just described?
So let me start on the degree side. And in fact, I have to say, we had not a single day to get them ready. We received the requirement by the Berlin Senate on March 12th to really go online on March 13th. So there was really no preparation. But what started then is really a very intense discussion among faculty members, what works and what doesn't. And we also just looked at the ratings our classes, our professors receive in online classes, and whether they are different from the in-person classes. And in fact, I see quite some excitement about the quality of these programs. I have to say though, I'm not sure whether this excitement simply comes from the fact that students will now say, oh, it's much better than we had expected, or maybe than we had feared. It's also a question of whether this can be sustained in the medium or even long term once students realize that a lot is missing, that, for example, the social interaction, the building of trust, the building of relationships on which later on only these online courses could work. But let's say for the time being, for the first couple of weeks, it looks as a very positive response as based on participants' feedback.
Okay, so that is basically a very similar experience that we also generally had in the degree programs. Okay, what's your perspective, Martin?
Yeah, I guess people were happy that they have something. I think the level of expectation was a little lower, Jörg. That was therefore a bit easier to comply with the expectations. But that's a temporary event because everybody was in a kind of shock and saying, let's see how we can continue to be productive. Over the next months, I guess the expectations will go up, and there will be less forgiveness for technical issues and glitches here and there. So that's virtual space needs to be really conquered professionally, and it will. And we will find the balance, and there will be an experimentation between how much ever it will be allowed in the next months, in-person experiences and virtual experience. So post-pandemic, I see here a new balance, and there is competition. That is right. I see also that, and you mentioned the alumni don't need to reach out for help, but I see also the alumni as an client, as a retail client, which is not yet that evolved, where you could say you get a lifetime, not employment guarantee, but a refresh every year, which might be a portfolio of digital assets, any personal assets. And there might be even more and more individuals who pay on their own for a kind of a package, not only one program, but a kind of a comprehensive 12 months ongoing for whatever, a couple of hundred bucks. If you look LinkedIn Learning, I am a client. This is €27 a month. If you look at how many thousand clients they have, is a really revenue generating engine on the retail clients. I see members corporates who wanted to negotiate a couple of hundred licenses, and LinkedIn told them it's funny that you ask for a couple of hundred licenses. Members of your company have already 4,000 licenses on their own. So this is going really fast, that people are prepared, not in the thousands, but in the hundreds, to invest into their employability. And that's digitization allows to go down that route to quite some effectiveness.
I like what Martin says about experimentation. I think we are like in television, black and white, 1962. We have boring backgrounds. We only have one camera. And by the way, the learning experience for executive is not just having a professor talking to an audience. I mean, what we did last week, for example, during this orchestrating winning performance program, is that we had corporate visit. You can include interviews. Mm-hmm. You can, as you said, run polls. You can make the experience actually quite exciting, because what you don't want is that people leave after 20 minutes. So you need to always surprise the participant by having some kind of, experience all the time. The thing is that you can wow the participant once, but then it becomes, the expectation again higher and higher. And that's why I think, many people or executives have this perception that certain business schools in Europe or United States have a very strong image, but nobody was ever, I think, able to attend the same course in 5 different universities. Today, you can do that. This is going to redistribute the cards in terms of reputation and branding. Today, one of the biggest assets we have is a branding, because people are going to try, a course at IMD or at ESMT, but then they would pass a judgment on this particular experience. So the jury is out. We're going to see a lot of very interesting transformation in the next couple of months and years. That's
maybe adding to, maybe adding to that, and going also back to Ulrich's earlier question regarding the scale, the entry. It is also that the whole question of cooperation between also business schools will have an important role. I mean, IMD, ESMT, for example, are jointly partners of the Global Network for Advanced Management, where we are experimenting with the so-called SNOCs, which are not MOOCs, but small network online courses. So this means they are not available to everybody, but rather to a very selective group. We also at ESMT, we have conducted our investment in Blended in cooperation, for example, with Imperial College, IE. So that are maybe also some of these answers in figuring out new ways of cooperation to deal with new opportunities.
This is particularly important, I think, for the smaller school, because the big school, you know, the Stanford or Harvard of this world, they have billions of dollars to spend. If you're a little school, little in terms of size, I mean, with very limited financial means, and you're interested in delivering executive education, you have to be creative. You have indeed, as Martin was saying, you need to be able to reach out to an ecosystem of startup, you know, communication agencies, etc. That's why, for me, and I'm insisting on that, it's not, you know, kind of tweeting what we were doing 6 months ago. No, it's to rethink totally from scratch, almost the whole learning experience. That's I think, the greatest opportunity that COVID-19 is offering business school.
I take that as a message that you say that smaller schools may actually demonstrate a higher degree of agility in the end, if they actually involve the right people.
Exactly.
Which may not always be the professors.
Don't try to replicate what you have been doing offline, online. Totally rethink your learning experience. That's my philosophy.
I think that's a very important message, because you know, obviously the executive education sector is very diverse, and I also saw that Martin actually wanted to say something. But let me try to frame this in the context of, well, we have on the one hand, we have executive education outfits that focus more on customized, others more on open enrollment. They're obviously also up, you know, they have different types of clients. You know, they may be actually very high up in the corporate hierarchy versus, you know, providers that mainly target middle management. And that was also raised in the chat channel, you know, actually for the ones more middle management and maybe more open, is there a different takeaway from all this? Martin?
Well, I wanted to refer to the point first of Dominic, to say, now, if you are in a smaller school and you have not the budgets to invest in a pure digitized environment, giving up is wrong. There are so many edtechs out there who still looking for their market, and there are other partners who might be in the same problem, that they have a solution which is limited in scope, and teaming up in an ecosystem thinking can really create interesting new proposals. So not thinking within the limitations of the own resources, but think broadly in an ecosystem kind of logic can really create new opportunities even for smaller players. But you need to be creative, you need to be adventurous in that respect, and the next year will offer opportunities. And I'm sure that there are a number of edtech companies would love to team up with a couple of schools.
Let me come in here, yeah, because I think especially the smaller players, what they're facing is that, you know, if they had a pipeline, it's drying up. So you may be very creative in terms of the products that you want to put on the market, but the question is, how do you find your client in today's time? How can they actually then demonstrate and reach the client that would be interested in this type of a product? Maybe that's a very plain question, but I think a very relevant one for the not so top level providers.
Actually, I think it's a very important question, and maybe it's a question that applies to everybody. The whole question of, you could say, the sustainability of the business of business schools is a question that will be asked and has been asked now in many of these fora. And it really comes down in the end to the following. I recently heard from a colleague at a top-notch institution in the United States who said the following: in fact, we've always advertised that what you really pay for at our institution is not the knowledge, but the experience. So how can you now make an argument where the experience doesn't exist anymore, that you still can charge these premia that are being charged? So therefore, I think it comes down to what we've said before, that indeed, in my view, it must be about experience at a point of time when the commoditization of content increases. So to put it in my case, as Ulrich knows and mentioned, we are both in the area of corporate finance. So for example, to offer how you calculate a cash flow or net present value is probably nothing that an executive education participants would be willing to pay for, simply because you can get it online, you can maybe even repeat and get the same insight. However, when it comes to the question of how do you apply this as a company in strategically dealing with capital markets and understanding what the expectations are and providing this type of exchange, I would find it very hard to imagine that this could be done at least exclusively online. It needs to have this interaction. It needs to have also the back and forth, which in the end only can come in person. Or put differently, that all we do as business schools in the end requires some part of in-person exchange, building the trust, the relationships, the context in which we can operate.
Well, I think going back to your question about, how do you reach the clients, etc. I think you have to be able to demonstrate that what you are doing online is as good as what you are doing face-to-face. The great thing about digital is that, it's all, as Martin was saying, about experimentation. The great thing about digital is that you can experiment fast, fail fast, but then you have to move on. I think it's extremely important. Digitalization is a great opportunity to experiment.
And also to experiment sales on the internet. You can sell on LinkedIn, you can sell on many other opportunities which you might never have touched so far as an executive education provider.
Very good point. We haven't touched upon content so far, but there's a lot of buzz in the media that clients need different types of training. So for instance, I've read that calmness and stress management is a topic that's very relevant today. Cybersecurity, so what kind of topics besides these do you see? And I'm also wondering in that context whether this is actually an opportunity to also partner with other faculties within a university. So that actually gives us, a different take of being really multidisciplinary in the way, we offer training to corporate clients. Who wants to start? Jörg, you're nodding.
Yeah, with pleasure. I mean, definitely what you just described is also the type of demand we are observing, that, for example, questions of dealing with a crisis, how to lead in a crisis, become very vocal and become very frequent. At the same time, what we see is also, when you look at this from a perspective of which companies do well, which companies do not do well, then you see that, for example, NASDAQ has reached its all-time high. So many of the digital platform companies really do very well, and some of, you could say, the real companies fall behind. So this means the question of digital models, and maybe even the acceleration of digital models due to the crisis, plays a big role. Innovation, maybe the re-engineering of supply chains, these are important parts. And maybe to your last part, I would, for example, foresee a strong interaction with medical schools. So that, for example, the leadership of the medical system requires much more attention than it has in the past, so that medical doctors all of a sudden see how much of management attention such a crisis requires, of how to deal with it, which measures to take. So therefore, I think this is indeed a very promising and in that sense also necessary way to team up with other departments.
I would frame it in the triangle which I alluded to you, between the it, the we, and the I. The I was something when I introduced in Deutsche Bank in the late 90s with the McGannons from Stanford Institute, personal health and well-being. people said he's crazy. That was a view of the heroic manager and doesn't need to do anything about that in public. This is your personal thing. Now, mindfulness and wellness, this is currently something which is highly acceptable to think about you and your functioning. And then we have the we, your ability to team up and how you play in the team, and the it. And on the we side, there is a lot of psychological tools and psychometrics that you could bring in, as well as on your own side. And you can team up here with many boutiques, individuals, or other, if you are part of a university, other faculties. And the it, certainly, this is the strategy and the strategic context of the company. I've seen a few. MIT tried to sell to the oil and gas industry, always to team up with geologists and the School of Geology, which content-wise worked, delivery-wise not always worked, because the colleagues were not necessarily used to speak in front of executives. But as a broadening of your ability to combine topics around these three areas, the strategic context of a client, the ability to collaborate and work in teams and move toward agile, and the introspection, thinking about yourself, and how to combine that in a effective, powerful learning experience, needs an ecosystem thinking of partners that you need to team up. I don't know, and I wouldn't recommend to have everything in-house. That wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are all moving into partnership with, other institutions. IMD has been partnering with Politics School of Lausanne next door, which is, one of the very top technology university in the world. And this enables us to address a number of issues that we could not have addressed, with our own faculty. Issues on, around, the use of artificial intelligence, digital transformation. As Jörg was saying, I mean, there are certain topics that are clearly in more demand than others. And when it comes to digital transformation, I think a lot of executives don't know how to handle this kind of thing. We recently ran a survey that shows that large majority of executives, when they start on digital transformation, fail because technology is moving very fast. Companies are still working in silos. So leadership, innovation, all these topics are in big demand, but we have to look at them from, again, a different angle. And it means we need to be very agile because, anything that deals with technology means that things are changing very fast.
Very good, thank you. So while Martin, can you answer the last question that showed up in the chat that was directed at you? And then to the panel, I would like to, give you a bit of a curveball question as my last one. Rita McGrath wrote a book recently, Seeing Around Corners. And I think that's a very informative book also in the context, that we live in right now. We seem like to believe, well, we have the whole pandemic under control. And, if you live in continental Europe, everything is opening up again. People are going to the beaches and to the parks. It almost feels like normal again. But we are aware that there are economic disruptions that are still to come. And that probably will be very serious in certain countries. And you are now an executive education provider. You saw a significant drop in your revenue. You probably held on to your personnel because you believe you need them after the crisis. But there comes the point where you have to kind of reflect. Do you have to temporarily downsize, especially if there are then significant bankruptcy waves and disruptions? What are the inflection points that you see that people should watch out for, where they say, now we really have to switch into a different type of crisis mode temporarily to deal with the financial fallout differently? Any thoughts that you can share? As I said, it's a bit of a curveball, but I give it to Jörg first because he's from the field, so he can probably spontaneously say something.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is an impact that executive education has taken, the business of executive education has taken. And now it's, I think, as for many other, or let's say for all other businesses, it's a question of the time length it takes for the economy to recover. If it's going to be quick, then it's better for us as it is for anyone else. And the second one is obviously, when is vaccination going to come in? Now, I would say the good news is that we see now basically way back to normality, in the sense that I wouldn't expect a second wave, but rather I would expect hotspots that come again and again in terms of what's going to happen, but that there might also be a little bit more expertise of how to deal with these hotspots. So therefore, that I wouldn't expect us to be back to real normal even within a year or so, but at least I would see small steps going that way. So and in that sense, I don't see the inflection point right now, but I have absolutely to admit the length of the economic crisis has obviously a direct one-to-one effect on what's happening to business schools, in executive education in particular.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to give you, at the end of this webinar, the opportunity to give an upbeat message to all your colleagues in executive education, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Who wants to start?
Well, I can start. I believe that if you continue doing, online what you have been doing offline, you are going to die very quickly. It's clear that we are not going to have provide the same experience again. I mean, I believe we are going to continue to have an hybrid experience where we're going to deal with a number of issues online and others face-to-face. And my third message would be that, again, I think it's a great opportunity to totally rethink the learning experience in a very creative way. And, you need to bring new people on board from maybe, not traditional academic. You need to listen to your clients because they have issues to solve. And, we bring value when we solve the headaches of our clients. And third, what Martin was saying is that that's a great opportunity to reach out to a different type of ecosystem, polytechnic schools, startup, communication agencies, etc. And finally, I would like to build on what Jörg was saying earlier on, which is that you need to personalize the experience. I think this is going to be critical.
Martin, Jörg, very quickly.
So clearly there is cost pressures in most industries. Some are doing fine, but altogether they certainly, for the next year or so, significant cost pressure, and that will travel down also on what people are prepared to pay as organizations for exec ed. So I think premium prices are a little bit more difficult for 12 months to realize. But I see clearly a huge need for the next decade of reskilling, upskilling in the interface between humans and machines. And I disagree that it's either the human or the machine. I see the symbiotic collaboration between the two will unearth potential of growth and productivity. And focusing on that, how you deal with technology and how you integrate it in your work system, that could be another area where executive education could much more encourage senior teams to go down that path. That again would, as Dominic said, certainly require teaming up with technology schools and partners to go down that path. So I see mid to long terms a lot of growth opportunities. I see for the next 12 to 24 months a little bit tight budgets that you have to deal with on the client side. And as always, only innovation helps along the entire value chain from idea, who is your client, how do I reach out to them and sell to them, and how do I design and deliver collectively with an ecosystem of partners. That's my take.
Thank you very much, Martin. Closing comment, Jörg.
Yeah, as you asked me to end with really an encouraging remark, I'm truly convinced, despite all the uncertainty, anxiety at this point of time, companies still want to become better, maybe even more so. Managers still want to learn and grow, and again, maybe even more so. And also students still would like to start meaningful careers, and again, maybe even more so. So now it's up to us as business schools to see whether this still increasing demand we can capture by our content, our research, our pedagogical qualities, our experience, our expertise, and maybe also our independence in that. So therefore, let's try to make the best to build on our existing strengths.
Thank you very much. Very upbeat. Colleagues, thank you very much. Dear participants, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This was overall a very informative day. I thank you also very much for the very positive comments that we received in the chat. I'm glad that you liked this webinar. Before I pass on to Rob, I want to particularly thank Nicole and her team, who did such an excellent job in preparing all the technology side, all the stuff I don't understand about running this webinar. And so I'm extremely helpful for their support. Rob, can you come in now?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ulrich, and to the rest of the panel as well. A reminder that this recording, the webinar at least, has been recorded, and we'll make that available ideally within the next few hours, but bear with us and give us about 24 just to be safe. It will be archived on gbsn.org as well, but you will receive an email directly as a result of having registered for this webinar, so not to fear. Also, apologies for the little technical glitch earlier. We'll make sure that we send that presentation along together with that email that you'll receive with the link to the video. Also, a reminder of our upcoming webinars, how to reposition international student recruitment after COVID-19. That's as part of this series. That takes place a week today, July 8th at 2 p.m. That's Central European time as well as Central African time, and at 8 a.m. Eastern. And this webinar will look at international student recruitment from a business perspective by putting the focus on recruitment cycles and international study motives, how much international diversification is desirable and needed. That's part of a whole long list in the series. The next one will be how to make business schools more resilient. The one thereafter, reconfiguring risk management of business schools, how to move beyond registers and other compliance rituals, and how to manage the institutional funding gap. All of these are on gbsn.org, and you can register for each of them, and you should register for each of them individually, please. With thanks again to Martin, Jörg, Dominique, and of course to Ulrich for moderating today's discussion. Thanks to you for engaging us today. Please look after yourselves and stay safe. On behalf of XOLAS, EFMD's Global Network, and the Global Business School Network, I wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening wherever you find yourself this Wednesday. Until next time, take care.